So now that we're ready to just do some finishing touches, the first one you might notice in your render is that your vehicle might look quite shiny and reflective at the moment. So if you just click on any part of your mesh, you can go over to where it says checker or whatever that material is called from Mudbox. If you want, you can go down to the specular shading, and you might want to drag the reflectivity down quite a lot, like maybe 0.1, unless it's something really shiny like glass. That should help you out. So I'm now ready to do a final render of my vehicle. So I don't want to render it with anything behind it though. I want to have full control over that in Photoshop. So I'm going to go to my channel box, and I'm going to go to turn off my ground plane, and I'm going to turn off my image plane as well. And I'm going to go to my render settings, and I'm going to go to quality. I'm just going to set the quality here just to 0.5 for now. And I'm going to go over to common, and I'm going to change the image format to TIFF, and I'm going to change the the size to HD 1080, and then I'm going to close that down and go ahead and render the current frame. Now that it's finished, I can see it is looking fine. Now that we're using sun and sky, it has put in some kind of horizon line here in the background. Don't worry, that won't actually save as part of your image. If you go up here, you can check to see your alpha channel of your image or the transparency. So if you click on that, anything in black can be invisible, and anything that's white will be saved in your final TIFF image. So I can toggle that on and off. I'm actually going to save this image out as well. So I'll go to File, Save Image, and I'll save it as Ship Final Diffuse. So the final image will be made out of 3 components: the background, the main mesh, and the shadow of the mesh. So I now just want to render the shadow of this mesh on its own. And to do this, I'm going to use a special render layer. So now that I've saved this image off, I'll just save it here as well, just to be safe. I can close my render view down. I'm now going to go to my, I'm in my channel box and layer editor here. We can see the display layers that we're used to using. And there's another tab here called render layers, which we're now going to utilize. So at the moment, everything in our scene lives in this master layer. And if I right click on my master layer and go to select objects in layer, everything will be selected, including the camera I'm looking through and the sun in the sky. I'm going to go to create a new layer with the selected objects, and I'm going to double click on it and name it shadow. So in the shadow layer, we can make changes to materials and things like that that aren't going to have any effect on our master layer down here, which is really useful. So if I go to my display layers now, I need to turn on my ground plane. That's really important. I'm also going to select my ground plane. Make sure that it's not set to anything like that. I'm going to select my ground plane and go to its attribute editor and find the material that's applied to it, which may be Lambert 1. And I'm going to just put the color up to pure white, or assign a new material and make it pure white. Now that I've done that, I'm going to select the group that makes up my vehicle. If you've not already grouped your vehicle, you might just want to drag and select your mesh, hold down Shift and deselect anything you don't want to be in that group, and go ahead and hit Control G on the keyboard. And if you deselect your mesh, then click on any part of it and hit the up arrow on your keyboard, your mesh will be selected as a group. Now that it's selected as a group, we need to tell Maya to make this invisible, so that all we'll have on a final render is a shadow on the ground, but nothing casting it, as if it's some kind of ghost or something. So to do this, we need to go to our Window, General Editors, and find our attribute spreadsheet, and as long as you have all of your group selected, you have a huge list here of every single object that is currently selected and all the things that you can do with them. If we go over to our render tab over here, you're going to see one of the attributes that we can change is called primary visibility. And so if you click on the whole column for that, so click on the title for that column, it's going to select that value for all of our shapes, all of our meshes. I can go ahead, maybe let's just say that, go ahead and type in 0 and then hit enter. So just to clarify, I clicked on the word primary visibility, and without clicking on anything else, I hit 0 and enter. And now everything's set to off. So this piece of geometry at the moment is set to be casting shadows, but it's not set to be visible. So if I minimize this, and even though we can still see it in our Maya viewport, if we go to our render view, and I've saved, kept that image, and I go ahead and render this out, we can see that it's rendered off just a shadow of a vehicle. And if we go to our alpha channel, we can see that the sky is going to be invisible and the ground is going to be visible. There are many other ways of rendering shadows off. This is one that can work. All we have to do in After Effects or Photoshop is just mask out the horizon line, and we're then free to do whatever we like with this shadow. So I'm going to go File, Save Image. I'm going to save this as Airship Final Shadow as a TIFF, and hit Save on that. So now we're ready for the next render layer, and this render layer is going to allow us to really fine-tune the shadows that we see within the vehicle itself. And so the current lighting setup that we have isn't set to bounce that many times, or to allow Maya to calculate all these tiny little shadows within crevices and close together parts of our vehicle. So we can cheat that with a layer called an occlusion layer. And what we're aiming for is something like this, which is kind of a render of all the shadows in all the nooks and crannies of our vehicle. So anything that's white is usually quite flat and plain, and all the dark areas here are where we'd expect to find really quite dark shadows where no light's really able to get in. So to create this kind of image, we need to go to our render layers over in our channel box over here, and go to your master layer. And we need to actually select everything except the sun and sky directional light. Sometimes that really mucks things up. So I'm just going to select everything in my scene just from my camera here. So I've selected the vehicle and I've selected the ground plane. In fact, I don't even want to select the ground plane, that can go away. I just want to select my vehicle for this. So just the vehicle on its own selected, and I'm going to go and create a new layer with the selected objects. I'm going to rename that by double clicking and naming it Occlusion. And now I'm going to right click on the word occlusion and go to Attributes, and just in case this window doesn't pop up, sometimes Maya doesn't allow this to pop up the first time round, just go back to your channel box, right click on occlusion, and just go to Attributes again. And this time it should take you to the correct place. We need to find the word presets, click on presets, go to occlusion, and immediately you'll see your mesh lose all of its textures and go pure black. Remember, don't worry, we still have the master layer where everything's how it should be, but we have a special render layer up here called Occlusion, which has applied a special shader to our vehicle. I'm now going to fine-tune some of these settings. Well, let's see how it's worked straight off the bat. So if I go ahead and render the current frame, it gives us this image, which actually isn't too bad. And so there's a few settings that we need to change. We can see it's a little bit grainy, and we also need to make some of the shadows even tighter. But that's a pretty good start. So I'm going to save that image in my computer's memory, and I'm going to see how we can improve some of these settings. So to change your occlusion settings, you go to right click, go to attributes, obviously on the occlusion layer, and we're in like the occlusion tab here, and over in the shading group there's an input box like this. You click on that, and then you find that same box again in out color. You just keep looking for this icon really, and just keep clicking on that, and eventually we'll get to this area here, the ambient occlusion section. So this number here, the samples, 16 is very low. For your final render, the very lowest quality you should have is actually 32. So I'm just going to type in 32 in there, and then just go to my render settings and make sure I've got HD 1080, and I'll close that down. And I'll go ahead and hit render. I'll make sure I hit enter here. Go ahead and hit render on those settings. And so this quality isn't too bad. We could probably up the samples even further. It's still a bit grainy. And just to confirm again that we have an alpha channel here, so this background of the sky won't be included. I'm going to save this image as a TIFF. I'm going to save it as an occlusion. But some of these shadows still aren't tight enough. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that. So at the moment, the parameters of our occlusion are, it's just calculating the entire size of our scene. So we can see here, max distance is currently set to 0. That's a lie. That's actually Maya automatically calculating the entire size of the scene. If it really was 0, everything would probably be just pure white, and we wouldn't be able to see anything. So as soon as you see the word, the number 0 in there, alarm bell should start ringing, and you know Maya's doing something on its own. So the first thing we've got to worry about is what number do we actually type in here. Do we just guess random numbers between 0 to 100? What we've got to do is calculate or work out the area of the scene that we're actually interested in. How many units away from the camera is, let's say, the furthest part of our vehicle. So to work out that distance between the camera and that piece of geometry, because that's what the occlusion is looking for with that max distance thing, is we can go to display, heads up display, and go to object details. And we'll see on any selected object, the distance from the camera is showing here. So if I click on the furthest piece of geometry, it's telling us it's 95 units away from the camera. So now if I go over to my channel box, right click on occlusion, go to attributes, click on this one, click on that one, and now in here I can go to max distance, and I should be able to type in, let's say, 90 in there, and go ahead and render that. And this is looking pretty similar to the render that we just got from Maya's automatic settings. So we know that a minute ago when Maya said 0 for the max distance, it really meant 90. It just wasn't telling you that. So I want to really make these shadows really small. So to do that, I'm going to reduce this number down a lot. In fact, if I reduce it to, let's say, something like 10, and then go ahead and re-render this shot, we should be able to see everything's a bit brighter. And if I just scrub between the Maya default settings one and my settings, we can see some of these shadows start to go away a bit, leaving us with even tighter shadows, but it's still not quite tight enough. So I'm going to go ahead and make that even more. So the max distance down to, let's say, 2. And now it's really only keeping the areas dark that are really close together. So just these really little areas beneath the pipes or in vents and things like that, they're going to be the only areas that are dark now. And that's what we're really looking for. So if you want to up the quality, you can, but I'm going to go and save that image as a TIFF in there. And now we're ready to composite this all together in After Effects or Photoshop.